I'd like to welcome those of you who've joined us for our call today, our ESN conversation on awakening to justice. My name is Bob Truby, and I serve as the National Director of the Emerging Scholars Network, which is a ministry of equipping and encouraging developing scholars who follow Jesus together. Yesterday, we celebrated Juneteenth, remembering the day when emancipation was announced to the final group of slaves at Galveston, Texas, in 1865. But the pursuit of racial justice in the United States has been a long one. We'll be learning about a particular group of Christian abolitionists from the late 1830s, whose work came to light with a recent discovery, and what a multiracial research team learned about their work. Before we begin, I'm going to take care of just a couple of housekeeping details. Just a note today, we will be recording our conversation. So please leave your mic muted and disable your video. That helps us avoid any kind of conflicts in things. So please mute your mics and your video. And if you leave any of those on, you allow us to use the recording and any screenshots of our conversation for InterVarsity ministry purposes. I'm going to stop the recording momentarily for us if you want to adjust any of your settings. Let me go ahead and do a couple of things here. Recording and introduce our speakers. Dr. Albert G. Miller, who's known as AG, is an associate professor of religion and Africana studies, Emeritus, after teaching at Oberlin College for 27 years in the Department of Religion, where he taught American and African American religious history. He received B.S.W. and M.S.W. degrees in social work from Adelphi University and the M.A. and Ph.D. in religion from Princeton University, and has pursued further studies at Union Theological Seminary in New York and Illiff School of Theology in Denver, Colorado. He is an adjunct professor with the Ashland Theological Seminary. He also is an ordained minister pastoring the Oberlin House of the Lord Fellowship and author of Elevating the Race, Theophilus G. Stewart, Black Theology and the Making of African American Civil Society, 1865 to 1924, as well as numerous articles, including a chapter in the book that we're talking about today, Awakening to Justice. Our other speaker, Doug Strong, teaches at the I actually had a problem in my notes here, but teaches at Seattle Pacific University in Wesleyan Studies. And Doug was one of the founders of the dialogue group that came together to start this book. And so, Doug, we really thank you for joining us as well. With that, we're going to just jump right into our interview here. Let me adjust one setting here. So anyhow, I wonder if we could just start by if you could just we could tell the story about the discovery that led to this book and how the Dialogue on Race and Faith project came out of that discovery. Doug, perhaps
you want to go ahead with that.
You go for it.
Okay. In 2015, one of the members of our group called the Dialogue on Race and Faith was the chaplain at Adrian College, a small church-related college in Michigan. And while being the chaplain there, he's also a historian. And he was the librarian at the college. Was told that there was a box during remodeling of a building, an old building. A box was found in the closet that clearly had been there for many, many, many years. And they didn't know what was in the box and wondered if the librarian could help. And she didn't really know. And so she asked this chaplain, Chris, if he could look at the box. And at the bottom of the box was a notebook. And the notebook had yellowed pages and handwriting. And in the notebook were the dates of 1839 and 1840, 1841. And what it was clearly was a diary, somebody's diary. And why that was remarkable to them is that the college, Adrian College, wasn't even established until 1859. So whose diary was this from 1830 and the 1830s? And so after some sleuthing, Chris discovered that the diary was from David Ingraham, who was an abolitionist and missionary who had graduated from Oberlin College. The president of Oberlin at that time, Asa Mahan, later became the president of Adrian. So we're just guessing that he brought the diary. Ingraham had died an early death of tuberculosis. And so we're thinking that the diary had been taken by Asa Mahan to his new place of employment as president of Adrian College. Well, why this is interesting is that it's not just a diary. It's the story of this Oberlin graduate, pastor, of his family, of his ministry, of his travels throughout the North during the late 1830s, and then becoming a missionary to Jamaica. Why Jamaica? Because Jamaica and other British territories had freed enslaved people before the United States. And so there was an attempt by Christians, to start schools and churches for previously enslaved people. And that's what Ingraham was doing. One other remarkable thing about this diary that was found is that while he was in Jamaica, the British Navy impounded an illegal slave ship that was coming from West Africa to bring more enslaved people. And since the Brits had already outlawed slavery, they took this slave ship, a Portuguese slave ship, brought it to Jamaica and freed the 556 people who had been enslaved. And then asked David Ingraham, the Navy did, the British Navy, asked David Ingraham to come on board the ship and to diagram it and chronicle the horrendous conditions that had been on the ship, which he did, and then sent that report back to the U.S. As newspaper accounts, which we still have. If we look in the archives, there are the newspaper accounts that Ingraham sent. But the original was in this diary with his handwritten diagram, with the compartments and the conditions and the measurements that these people had to endure.
Yeah, I thought one of the things that was fascinating in the book is you actually reproduce that page in one of the appendices of the book. So people who get the book can actually see that page from his diary.
And also the pages from the newspaper article that he sent, which has the then printed diagram. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. You made some interesting, you and Chris pulled together a group of people to work with us. I'd love to hear a little of the story about the forming of this dialogue on race and faith project.
Of course, in the late from 2015, 16, 17, 18, yeah, up through 2020, this is a turbulent time in our country's history on issues of racial justice. And any Christian, I think, was awakened to these the ways in which, or maybe I should say, white Christians were newly awakened to things that African Americans had long known. And so the question we had is, could we use this diary that had been found as a way for Christian historians, theologians, pastors to get together across racial lines and to discuss what are the implications for today, for today's racial justice. So the way in which David Ingram and several of his Black colleagues in the 1830s and 40s were able to organize against the injustice of their era, is there something, and to do so from an explicitly Christian perspective, from a theological perspective, is there a way that we could learn from that in how we approach issues of racial justice today from a theological perspective, from the gospel? And so we were able to get a grant to bring together a team of about 15 scholars, and AG was one of those. More than that, AG, we also met together several times, and because much of the action of this story took place in Oberlin, Ohio, AG really helped us a great deal by hosting our group in Oberlin in 2021.
AG, I wonder if you might even comment a little bit about your own experience of being part of this team.
After Doug and I got a chance to kind of reconnect ourselves, we realized that we were in the town of Princeton at the same time, doing our graduate work together, he at the seminary and me at the university. We may have even figured out that we took a class together. But my contact really came through Estrelda Alexander, who was a student of Doug's at Wesleyan. She went on to get her Ph.D. in theology. Was it a Catholic University? And as a Pentecostal theologian and historian. She's written some of the major works on African American Pentecostalism, and she was a part of the team of folk that Doug reached out to. And when I assumed that when they had a conversation about coming to Oberlin, she said, "Well, you need to reach out to A.G. Miller." And so she called me and said, "This guy Doug is going to call." And so we had the conversation, and I immediately got interested, and in part because it was I recognized the significance and importance of this diary and its linkage to Oberlin's beginning. With the story of the Lane Rebels and what that meant. The college was founded in 1833 by two pastors who were Finney revivalists and had some abolitionist leanings, but really they were there. They came out here because they felt like they had failed in Elyria, the county seat, in raising revival. So they wanted to create a school that would give access to train people to do revival, that would bring revival into the West. And remember, Oberlin is a part of what was what was called the Old Northwest. And so that intrigued me, that David Ingram had come up, and then we expanded the conversation to, this was not just a story about David Ingram, but it's also a story about two colleagues that he worked with, one being James Bradley, the first African-American to be at Lane Seminary. And he was there during the Lane debates and was one of the more powerful speakers at the Lane debate. And he had been captured in slavery, enslaved as an infant, a young child, from someplace on the west coast of Africa, was sold in the United States, was sold several different times throughout the Midwest and in the West, and eventually built himself up to be able to purchase his own freedom, and then found his way to Lane Seminary, where he was accepted and by the seminary and its students who were launching this radical move to preach abolition. And so that was really intriguing for me. And then you have Nancy Prince, who comes from a whole different background. Nancy, her family goes back to the American Revolution as a free Black woman in the Boston community. She links with her husband. I can't remember his first name, Prince.
Nero Prince.
Nero, that's right. Prince, and he's a merchant marine, and so they end up in Russia, of all places. And they spent about 10 years in Russia. She is working in a variety of different jobs in, close, and around the Tsar of Russia, and teaching the children English and other creates orphanages, etc. And he dies, and that forces her to come back to the United States, and that's where David Ingram meets her and invites her to come to Jamaica to help to establish educational institutions and religious mission work within this newly freed Jamaican population. And so, that was all intriguing for me. And so as I began to put together, they wanted to come to Oberlin for their the first trip, and I kind of organized the process along with Doug and our wonderful administrator, Aaron Morrill. The more and more I listened and participated, the more I was intrigued and wanted to be a part of it. And so we had a conversation and tried to figure out what my contribution would be, and we worked that out. And so I'm very happy to be a part and to continue to be a part of this great work.
Well, I wonder if you might explain a little bit more about kind of how this, particularly James Bradley and David Ingram, who were part of the Lane Rebels, how this Lane Rebels group formed, and then why they moved to Oberlin. What was happening at Lane Seminary, and then what happened, and why they made the move up to Oberlin.
Yeah, you want to start on it, and I'll finish it, Doug.
Oh, you're the Ohioan. Why don't you talk?
My mind just went blank. The main character in our story in Lane is
Theodore Weld.
Theodore Dwight Weld. Thank you. It's all back now. Theodore Dwight Weld, who had been came to faith in the revival movements under Finney, was a Finney acolyte, but had also built a relationship with Arthur and Louis Tappan. He had gone to school at another abolitionist school in upstate New York,
Oneida Institute.
The Oneida Institute, and had completed his training there. But they hatched a scheme to try to build an outpost for abolition in the Ohio Valley. And the Tappans had also supported why am I blocking his name now? The revivalist that started
Finney's church. Lyman Beecher,
thank you. The father of Harriet Beecher Stowe and others. And so Lyman Beecher had started Lane Seminary with Tappan money. and Tappan support. And so they wanted to piggyback on that and to go down to Cincinnati and to create this a kind of a bulwark, a front to Cincinnati is this very interesting place because it's on the Ohio River. It's the border of Kentucky. Even today, the Cincinnati airport is not in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's in Kentucky, right?
Yep.
So there's this it's kind of this northern southern city of Cincinnati, and it has all of the trappings of what that meant. And so there were communities of Black folk who had settled there, were coming through there through the Underground Railroad. And so it became this, and it's a port city that was moving everything toward the Mississippi Valley. And so it was this great place that Lyman Beach saw to build a beachhead and a way to educate folk to go into the Midwest. Well, so did the Tappans and the abolitionists felt that it would be a great place to organize. And so they organized revival type abolitionist meetings, extended conversations over several weeks nightly, debating. And remember, Cincinnati and Lane had both Northerners and Southerners who brought with them some Northerners who supported slavery, some Southerners who supported slavery, some Southerners who were anti-slavery, some Northerners who were anti-slavery, and they had got into great debate about the issue of slavery to convert the whole school, wanting to convert the whole school as not only as revivalist, but also as abolitionist. And this created some problems, particularly for the trustees, many of which were in the business community. And it's not just the debate, it was their actions. They were reaching out into the Black community in Cincinnati. They were educating people in Cincinnati. They were teaching them how to read and write. They were in fellowship with them. They were living with them as fellow human beings, in mixing and mingling Black men and white women and men. This created an uproar in the Cincinnati community because they were living out their faith as they thought in a sense of egalitarianism. And the trustees said, you must cease and desist this work. They decided that they would not cease, but they would rather withdraw from the school and created themselves another smaller institute at a local church. The one person that supported them was a trustee member who was Asa Mahan, who was one of their main support. And then there was another faculty, Morgan, who was another faculty member, supported those students. And at the same time, Oberlin was about to shut down. After 1833, they ran out of money. They were trying to figure out what to do. And John Shippard got wind of what was happening in Cincinnati, and he went to Cincinnati to have conversations with the students. The students decided that they would be willing to come to Oberlin and to move their makeshift educational institution to Oberlin if several things happened. One, that they would be able to admit without regard to color, because they wanted to bring with them their friend and fellow student, James Bradley. Two, that they would go and get support for this from the Tappan brothers. And three, that they would go and find Charles Finney and ask him to come to be their professor of theology. And 1835, that was the major decisions. Finding Charles Finney was not a problem. uh, Getting the Tappins was not a problem for Oberlin, but admitting without regard to color was an issue. And the campus and the town were severely divided. And as it turns out, it passed with one vote. Reverend Keep, who was the trustee, the head of the trustee board, tossed the final vote, the split vote in favor of admitting Black folk without regard to color, and thus the founding of a second generation of Oberlin College, and the bringing of Charles. Now, Charles Finney came, and he added some of his own, that the faculty would be, that the trustees could never make a decision about how the faculty should teach and about faculty governance. And so that was one of his, because he wanted to be free to teach and to preach in the way in which he felt. Charles Finney had a lot of supporters, but he also had a lot of enemies. His theology, he was not a trained theologian, so he had a lot of issues. And so he wanted to be free to teach in the way in which he wanted to teach. And so
He
Doug,
hadn't gone to Princeton Seminary, and a lot of Presbyterians were not happy with that.
exactly. That's right. He refused to go. I don't know if that
He refused to go because he said, if I ended up the way that you all preach, I don't want that, so I'm not going to go.
Does that
So
give you a bit
that's
of
a great overview of the whole thing. That is terrific. Hey, I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about the connection of revivalism to abolitionism, because it seems like there was quite a connection between those two, at least certainly at Lane and Oberlin.
Yeah. Doug, why don't you?
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful story. I commend anybody who's interested to read two different books on this. The older book, it was by Timothy L. Smith, and it's called Revivalism and Social Reform. It was a book, it's very old now, it's from 1956, but it's still a classic. And then another book by Donald W. Dayton called Discovering an Evangelical Heritage. And both of those books talk about the connections between Finney revivalism, that's often called New Measures revivalism, because they had certain new measures like extemporaneous preaching and the allowance of women to speak and pray publicly, and a number of other and outdoor meetings and so forth, and which was all new. And so these new measures, the connection between that revivalism and abolitionism is actually very strong. And they both happened at about the same time, really beginning in the early 1830s. Finney's revivalism was taking off, and not just Finney, but really dozens and dozens of other lesser known revivalists during that era. And at exactly the same time, the abolitionist movement was growing. Now, there were abolitionists who were not revivalists. There was a wing of the abolitionist movement by a guy named William Lloyd Garrison in Boston, who wasn't wonderful of a revivalist, but he was actually pretty much against any kind of Orthodox Christianity. But there was actually a split in the abolitionist movement between those people, Garrison's type, and then the more revivalist people who were connected with Finney, and then the Tappan brothers that Dr. Miller mentioned in New York City, who were wealthy and financed a lot of the abolitionist movement and the revivalism at the same time. And so the connection between these two movements that were flourishing in the 1830s and 40s is very strong. And really, you can't talk about one without the other, which is interesting because I think for many people, the understanding of Christian revivalism being connected to racial justice, people aren't used to that connection being made, but it was very strong in the 19th century.
Yes, yes. Well, I want to take a break here just to mention, just to mention a book that you two have worked on, and I'm going to share screen here for a moment. So the book we've been talking about is called Awakening to Justice, and we just want to let people know that you can purchase the book, and I'll put this link in the chat for 25% off at the University Press website with free shipping if you use the code IVPESN at checkout. And that discount's good through June 27th. And if you want to order other things at University Press along with this book, you can get the discount on the whole order. So I'd encourage you, if you don't already have a copy of Awakening to Justice, to pick up one at University Press. And I just think it's a great book. I'm a little prejudiced because so much of it's Ohio history, and I'm a lifelong Buckeye, but it is a great and interesting and challenging account. Okay, with that, I'm going to invite, we have time for audience Q&A. If you want to put questions in the chat, please feel free to do that at this point. And actually today, we're a small enough group. We'll actually put the gallery view on, and if people would like to jump in and ask a question, you can unmute your mic and do that as well. So you're welcome to either put things on in the chat or on screen, or raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can just unmute and we can talk. So while we're waiting on that, I did want to ask the question, one of the interesting questions, Dr. Miller, is what happened in Oberlin subsequent to the beginnings? You write actually about how Oberlin was kind of this experiment in interracial Christian community. How did that experiment go as time went on?
Yeah, yeah, we in Oberlin today are still grappling with that sense of loss and transition. I think Oberlin, if you talk to my conservative friends, they will not highlight the loss of the justice tradition. They will highlight the loss of the religious tradition, commitments. And they will lament that Oberlin of yesteryear and Charles Finney and sometimes in many cases I don't think they really understand who Charles Finney was.
They want the revival without the abolition, huh?
Right. Well, not only that, but they don't even understand his theology.
Yeah.
And they would be abhor to think that he did not really hold the traditional notion of original sin, right? And many of my conservative folk will want to latch on to as their own understanding, their premillennial understanding of the Christian faith, and attach it on to Finney's post-millennial understanding of the Christian faith. And I think that's one way in which I think the college and the town over time became more and more of a kind of post-millennial moved in that direction and became more secular as in the process. But at the same time, after the fervor of the abolitionist movement and the Civil War, you could begin to also see a shifting, not only of Oberlin, but I think the country. of a softening, uh, a softening of and a lessening of emphasis on not only abolition, but on justice issue and on equity issues, and begin to focus on other bigger issues as the country did, i.e., the large numbers of immigrants that started to come into the country and the ways in which that shaped their thinking. Many of the earlier Oberlin abolitionists who became educators, like Ingraham did, eventually began to turn their direction to Asia and to other places across the globe, and so they began to take on those broader issues. And I think over time, Jim Crow, as I said, there were Northerners who, not all Northern folk were abolitionists or were anti-slavery. Some were kind of neutral, and others, certainly were not looking at the broader notions of egalitarianism. And what does it mean to create beloved community, to think about how you will deal with Black people and other folk of color, Native Americans in this land that is emerging as a national and international power. And so white supremacy begins to take hold in subtle ways, to the point that, as I mentioned in the opening of my chapter, as we were all encouraged to write something that would kind of speak to the issue of why we, how do we connect to this story, that we found out that by the turn of the 19th century, Oberlin had begun to segregate itself.
Turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, thank you. Turn of the 20th century. Thank you very much. Began to segregate itself, not only de jure, but de facto.
Mhm.
And
housing covenants you mentioned, and
covenants, and beginning to limited purchasing of people's ability to live and work in other parts of the community. Where before there had been Black folk involved with the Board of Education and City Council. Yeah, it was not after the turn of the 20th century. It was not until 1954 that we had our first Black council member for almost 50 years. So, I think that these are hard realities that we today even, we were fortunate enough to be able to show the film. Someone in the chat mentioned the film, debut it in Oberlin on Monday night to a packed house. And I think that it was well received. And I think people were shocked in many ways to kind of learn of this part of our history, and to continue to figure out, how do we try to create just, equitable society in which Black people and white people and Asians and Latinos and LGBTQ and others can live in harmony and work and live together. So,
one of the follow-up questions actually was, how different is the film from the book?
I would say it followed the film for me, takes the essence of what we were trying to what we were grappling with as we wrote this book, in the context in which we wrote it. That is, from what we started with 1920, in the fall. You reached out to me, I think, in late 19, and was it
2019? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2019, and we wanted to have our first meeting in Oberlin in maybe August of 20, and two things happened. COVID came that shut us out. And then an amazing movement rose called Black Lives Matter with the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. And people went to the streets. And as we finally get together in the August of 21 to feel comfortable that we could come and meet together in 2021 in Oberlin, the filmmakers are filming it in the midst of all of this. And so they're listening to us dialogue about what does beloved community mean? How do we think and understand Prince and Bradley and Ingraham in this context? And they're watching everything else that's going on around us. And they begin to get their own vision of how they want to tell this story. And as I think, what was it? Supposed to be 10 minutes, Doug, initially, kind of a 10-minute promo, and then they came back with 20 minutes. And we said, wow, this is amazing. And then, but we left this out, you left that out. And it came back finally 35-minute film that had a great review that Doug and I were able to go to the Justice Film Festival in February in New York for a debut, and got great reviews there, and has had, and even in Oberlin at the showing of over, I think well over 300 people that showed up at our local theater to see the film, and were really blown away and really challenged. So I think the book and the film are two platforms that are speaking to the same questions and asking the same questions. How do we reconcile as Christians the way in which racism has become so insidious in our culture, and in fact, not just insidious, but now blossoming into white Christian nationalism, into the ways in which we understand our social society and politics today. And I think both the book and the film speak to both of those.
Well, you just anticipated my final question, and that was to talk about, the book in some sense, the final chapter in the book is titled A Prophetic Past. And the sense that this past that you studied speaks prophetically to our present. And Doug, I wonder if there are things that you might add to that in terms of your own sense coming out of this project of how this book spoke prophetically to our present day.
Yeah. Well, as AG has alluded to, we are living in a fraught age in our country, increasingly polarized. And I think Christians are, this is my opinion, Christians are needing to make some decisions about who we're going to align with. And it seems particularly challenging when this Christian nationalism continues to grow in influence with all sorts of agendas. And especially when you see a completely different history from the 19th century, one where a fervent evangelism, in fact, the most evangelistic folks in the 19th century, eager to bring people to Jesus, were the same people that saw that racial justice advocacy was central to their message, and other reforms, by the way, also.
Yeah.
And the linkage for them was seamless. They didn't see any kind of problem with that. In fact, they saw a problem if you divided the justice work from the evangelism work. And so for us in our project, it just seems why is it so difficult for us as Christians today to see that same connection, rather than a connection of Christianity with forces that are really pushing towards injustice? At least that's how it looks to me, pushing towards the marginalizing of people who are different, towards immigrants, towards people who are, that look or act differently than what we think of as a sort of white norm in our country. Anyway, that to me, that the application is so profound, and so, and to get, for me, it's very inspiring to read David Ingram's journal, which, by the way, the entire transcribed journal is on the website, is free for people to read. Selections of it are in the book, excerpts, and then the entire journal, transcribed journal, 100 some pages, is on the website. So anybody can read that. But it's so encouraging, because here's a man who was dying of tuberculosis, so suffering lots of health issues, having to deal with regular kinds of conflicts of between there were tensions between the different missionaries, and he and his wife are trying to raise a couple children, and one of the kids dies, which is of course so common in the 19th century. So all these things in his life, while he's trying to promote racial justice with Jamaican and recently freed slaves who he wants to see as his brothers and sisters. That kind of, and by the way, he's doing this while he's quoting hymns and praying deeply to the Lord, and asking for more of God's Spirit in his heart. And you just can't help but really have this admiration for this man, and as a Christian, and if he could do it, why can't we do it today?
Yeah. The striking, I'm impressed with this connection between the passion for evangelism, for seeing people come to faith, and the passion for seeing people come to liberty. And
they're deeply connected, right?
They are deeply connected.
It's freedom in Christ,
how we can
and
separate
freedom
them is.
Yeah.
AG, is there anything else in maybe a minute or two that you'd like to add to that? We need to come to a conclusion.
I just want to respond to Fred. Fredson and Williams mentioned something about Oberlin and HBCUs, and he is absolutely correct that the many of the missionary societies that came up, that emerged out of Oberlin, went to help to start not only HBCUs, but also other multiracial integration, like Berea College. It helped to plant folk at Tougaloo College, at Fisk University, at Alabama State University. It is John Mercer Langston, an Oberlin alum, who starts the law school at Howard University, and his George Voyer Vachon, his predecessor and mentor, helped to create Howard University. And so, Oberlin, both black and white, folk went out from Oberlin and saw education as a major part of its mission. And so, and in that way, it really did make major contributions. So.
Well,
hey, I just wanted to mention, people wanted to know about the film. The film can be viewed through, there's a platform called Kinema, Kinema, and you can you can watch it through that platform for a $5 fee, but you can access it through the Awakening to Justice website, awakeningtojustice.com. And actually, that that showing of the film through Kinema. Dr. Jamar Tisby, who's one of our project participants and members, is going to be hosting something, a viewing in July for that.
Great, great. Well, you know, a number of folks are just saying what a powerful story this is, and we really appreciate both of you for taking the time today to acquaint us with that story. And I'll just want to mention one more time the book in case you missed knowing how to get that. The book is the book is Awakening to Justice, and it can be purchased at University Press for 25% off. The discount code and the link are in the chat. And so I would encourage you to order that. I just want to give you a quick preview of our next conversation. Our next conversation is about a work by George MacDonald that is being released with InterVarsity Press called Diary of an Old Soul. Which was where MacDonald wrote 7 line stanzas for each day of the calendar year. And actually, the original had a blank page opposite each stanza where people could do their own journaling. And the InterVarsity Press edition is going to have the same feature. Timothy Larson is going to join us to introduce that to us. He actually wrote the introduction to this new edition of the Diary of an Old Soul, and he's going to introduce us to the diary, to George MacDonald, and this particular edition of it. So, for those who are fans of George MacDonald or would like to get to know more about him, we hope you'll join us. Finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you especially for Dr. A.G. Miller, who stepped in on a day's notice to be with us. And we are very grateful for that, for Doug Strong, and for all of your work on this project and for being here today. I want to thank InterVarsity Press, who helps us set up these conversations, and all of you for joining us. Lastly, we just want to mention this is brought to you by the Emerging Scholars Network. You may join the Emerging Scholars Network for free at blog.emergingscholars.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at ESN IVCF. And we post all of our videos on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/ESN IVCF. And you are welcome to join us there. So thank you, everyone. We're going to conclude our recording, and if anybody wants to stand for a couple of minutes and chat informally, you're welcome to do so.